Tashidele, welcome to week 5 of Kalachakra. So we have been working on the outer world and some of the characteristics in terms of the stars and the planets and the movements of those and so forth. And we get to the last chapter on the outer world now, called Resolving Contradictions between Kalachakra and Abhidharma Cosmology. And the diagrams in the back in Appendixes 9 and 10 are somewhat helpful in getting an idea of how this is being visualized, but it doesn't really provide a great deal of detail, but it's worth at least looking at them. So here we're talking about refuting contradictions, and so the first point is the points of doubt. So what are the contradictions, basically? So the Abhidharma and the presentation here in Kalachakra, it says, are very different. Here the differences in the presentation of the world will be briefly set out. And the way it is presented in Abhidharma is as follows, and so then it goes through the quoted text there. And basically it's addressing the different measurements that we've talked about previously in this text, so there's no need to go through all of that fine detail. As we move on to 146, the third paragraph just above the quote there, on the differences regarding Meru and the continents upon that mandala foundation, the Abhidharma Kosha states that Meru has 4 precious gems, 80,000 underwater, and as much as it is submerged, so above the 80,000 yojana. So basically in Kalachakra, we had the 4 precious gems, which is common. We'll come back to that. But one of the unique characteristics is that it is viewed as being submerged. It's much bigger than what we actually see. We only see, it's kind of like the iceberg theory, okay? You see the tip of the iceberg, but you don't see the bulk of it, which is actually underwater. Thus, Meru has 4 sides, is made of 4 precious gems, the east of silver, the south of lapis lazuli, the west of red crystal, the north of gold. But in the Kalachakra, Meru is taught as being circular. Black in the east, red in the south, golden in the west, and white in the north. So it has a different presentation. Mostly these are just minutiae kinds of specific details. The effect of those is not particularly significant in one way or the other. Whether you view one side as one particular color or another particular color is not going to make a great deal of difference in terms of the practice itself. Then the next paragraph, the Abhidharma Kosha, says that there are 7 golden mountains, 7 bountiful lakes, and no continents there. The shapes are also said to be square. Here in the Kalachakra, a continent is located between each mountain range and a lake to form 7 continents whose shapes are all circular. So in Kalachakra they're all circular, and the actual organization of the continents, subcontinents, and the lakes and so forth are a little bit different. And these are all in a circular shape. So then it goes on, talks a little bit more about Abhidharma Kosha view, and there's a quote there, but just past the quote it says, the black iron mountains surround the outer ocean, which contains the 4 continents and the 8 lesser continents, located at the 4 cardinal directions and the 8 intermediate directions. You may recall in the way of describing this when we do the mandala, the 37-point mandala, and we look at that. So we've got Meru in the center, and then you've got the 4 continents in the cardinal directions, and then you have 2 subcontinents on either side of those continents. So that's what is being referred to here. In the Kalachakra, there are no seas between the Shita Mountains and the water mandala. And the area of the circular earth mandala is divided into 12 connecting continents or sectors. And then continuing below the quote there on the second line, the hot hells, cold hells, and neighboring hells are spoken of as being directly below the continent of Jambudvipa. So the organizational structure is a little bit different as well. If you go back on 614, page 614 in the appendices, it has a diagram. Well, I guess it's page 615. Got my numbers mixed up here. And it has the Kalachakra world realm, and it shows the shape of these different things, which, if viewed from above, would be in a circular pattern. And then Mount Meru, and then with the throat, face, and crown aspects that we described earlier as a part of that. So it gives you a little bit of idea of the overall shape of what is being articulated here in terms of the Kalachakra version of this. So then it goes through a series of things describing the lifespans in the various hell realms. And so it talks about those here in the Kalachakra. It says the hot hells and cold hells are beneath Meru. That's in that diagram we were just looking at. And the mountains, continents, and oceans of the earth mandala. So then it goes into the lifespans, and then at the top of 148 it says, as for the number of hells, no more than 8 are mentioned, while the Abhidharma Kosha and other texts talk of 18 hells. So divided up into different categories. And then in the next paragraph, the inner and outer worlds do not agree at all on shape, size, number, and so forth. Also, the Kalachakra presentation of channels, winds, and their movements within the human realm, human body, differ from those of other tantras. So in addition to being different from the Abhidharma, it's also different from the way it's described in other tantras. So there's a variety of things, and so we need to be flexible. This is just another form of impermanence. And so as has been pointed out on several occasions, you just go with the flow when it comes to the different descriptions that we encounter in different tantras and so forth, regardless of what is being described, because they're not permanent, they're not fixed in any way. So you just follow what that particular text has and describes. So the second point in this chapter is how such doubts are expressed. And it begins by saying some Indian scholars and even some Tibetan scholars maintain that the Kalachakra is not a perfect tantra, citing its contradiction with the Abhidharma and other tantras as the reasons. And then there's a quote, and then down below that another one embedded in the regular part of the text that talks about specific people or texts in terms of these differences. And then there's another short paragraph, and then the one just before the next quote says that some maintain that the Tantra and commentaries of Kalachakra are valid texts, but their presentations on the world and its inhabitants that contradict other Tantras require interpretation. So basically they're different, yes, but it's just a matter of interpretation. Okay? And so then it has a quote here from the sheaves of oral transmission. Those parts taught in the Kalachakra do not contradict other tantras. I follow as texts of our own scripture. Some which are contradictory because they follow the inclinations of certain disciples have been resolved. So some people have developed explanations of these to resolve those particular conflicts. As to the rest, although the contradictions have not been resolved, there are no faults in them at all. So everything is perfect, kind of a Dzogchen view. Everything is perfect just as it is. This has been explained at great length, and so they are perfectly acceptable. Of course, he doesn't give us the at great length part of that to explain all of that. We just assume that because he says it's okay, it is okay in this case. And then just below the quote, this means that whatever is taught in the Tantra and commentaries and does not contradict Guhya Samaja and others can be taken literally. So some of the things can be taken literally, but there are some explanations involved in trying to clarify what some of those differences are. Now that's a kind of an unusual statement in a way to say that things can be taken literally, because most of the lamas say that you don't want to take these things literally at all. Very few things are to be taken very literally. And so there are these unresolved contradictions that need some interpretation, and it's basically saying, but that's all acceptable. And it does go through here and give an example of how that might apply. And then in the last paragraph on 149, some Tibetan lamas maintain that teachings from the Kalachakra are definitive, while those in the Abhidharma tradition were taught to accord with their minds of the lower vehicles and are therefore provisional and are not to be taken literally. So we have these contradictions, we have commentaries that are put forth as proofs of these different things, and we have countless counter-arguments and refutations of the proofs, as well as presentations that diverge from all of that and so forth. So it's kind of a mess if you just kind of look at all of what is involved in this. But again, if you don't try to take it literally, it really doesn't matter that much. And then on page 150, down on the third line, moreover, commentary passages clearly show that the description of a world realm in the Kalachakra and the Abhidharma tradition can both be accepted literally. So this will be explained. And so he's talking here about an example where a doubt is raised. And in the second quote here, the holders of views, is about the middle of that quote, holders of views who express their views to one another are not at fault in their views, because these are states of mind that arise from examination of meaning. And there are no thoughts of harming sentient beings, but only thoughts of helping them. So I may be wrong, but I'm just trying to help, so it's okay. Basically is what is being said there. But again, I think if we don't take them literally, but we look in terms of the meaning, and especially transcendent meaning, then that's not going to be an issue. Then we go on to the third part of this chapter, the commentary on the text that dispels such doubts. So now he's starting to get into a little bit more of the detail about his point of view about this. And so he quotes from the great commentary and the Abhidharma Kosha, and he's kind of comparing those two in that. And so just below that Abhidharma Kosha quotation, about 6 lines down, he says, the text from this part of the commentary sets out to dispel any contradiction between these two differing descriptions of the size and shape of this one 4-continent world. And then in the next paragraph, in reality, it is not possible to conclusively measure this 4-continent world according to the measurements found in either Abhidharma or Kalachakra. The descriptions are mere worldly conventions. Okay? So that's why we don't need to get too caught up in the minutiae, the details of all of this. And then about 3 more lines down, so the conqueror taught sentient beings the measurements of this world realm in accord with their differing dispositions. As he taught them, so they appeared in accord with their variety of karma. So and here, in a way, he was talking about the difference between a literal understanding and kind of a mythical understanding of that. And just remember that it's all in your mind. All of this is in your mind. Then he begins to talk about how the karma aspect of this. It goes into some detail about the karma and the effect of virtue versus demerit in terms of your karma, and how that might change the way that you see and understand things as a part of that. And then he gives an example on the next page, 152, about a cave in 5 cubits. So if this is a hypothetical example where we have this cave that's 5 cubits, so 5 lower arm lengths, basically, elbow to fingertips. And so this emperor arrives at this cave where this lama has been practicing for some time with his vast army, and the whole lot of them, all of them together, enter this small cave. Says down a few more lines, it seems impossible. In actuality, it is not, because it is brought about by the inconceivable power of the mighty bodhisattvas or arhats' merit and wisdom. In the same way, on one of Mount Meru of its 4-continent world realm, 2 completely different sets of shape and size measurements, one from the Abhidharma and one from the Kalachakra, can be validly perceived to exist. Okay, so different ways of looking at things, and you can consider both of them to be valid approaches to things. The next quotation down at the bottom of 152, the first line there, the karma that produces various external phenomena is inconceivable. Now this starts to border on rationalization at certain points if you get too carried away with the literal point of view. But again, if you back away from that, like in the 4 reliances, and you wind up looking at things from a more transcendent point of view, then I don't think that it really is that much of an issue. Whether the cave can hold a whole army or not really is kind of irrelevant. Symbolically, it could hold a whole army or not. And then continuing on to 153 down, about 7-8 lines, it says, in the words of the great commentary, as without, so within the body. So we're talking about the outer world and the inner world here. This means that this external 4-continent world realm is a base to be purified by meditating upon the mandalas that correspond to this world realm. And then about 3 more lines or 4 more lines, the body is said to be the mandala. There are, therefore, external Meru in measurements are mere worldly convention. And so that again is not all that important, and he gives the example that the Buddha gave about testing gold to see whether it is pure or not. And then at the very bottom of the page below that quote on 153 says, similarly, the words of the Buddha should undergo 3 tests, and when the teaching is seen to be pure, it should be accepted as valid, not merely out of respect or because of bias. So here we have those differing measurements, and in the second paragraph on 154 it says the measurements are not exclusively as taught here in the Kalachakra. However, the teaching and the assertion plays a special role in the creation of merit and wisdom for entering the generation stage and then the completion stage. This explains the affirming purpose for teaching a 4-continent world realm of the 400,000 yojani in the Kalachakra, which would basically be true of the Abhidharma as well. So when we keep that kind of a perspective, then we don't get caught up in these things. And then on page 155, just a few little things here. He talks about the intended disciples and their differences in karma. And then at the bottom of the first paragraph he says, the Buddha taught in accord with such appearances as they appeared to the minds of sentient beings. Now, these were not things that they could literally see, so it's an understanding in terms of what they were taught. So if they were taught one particular view, then they would in their minds see it from that point of view. If they were taught a different point of view, then they would in their minds see it from that other point of view. And then we continue into the second paragraph. In the second line, the Abhidharma composed by the master Vasubandhu was written about 300 years after the great commentary. And then about half a dozen lines down, the phrase from the great commentary, having seen the Buddhist Abhidharma, looks like a prophecy. So there's a contradiction here in timing of when one or the other of these things came into existence. Just wanted to point that out. And then in the next paragraph, another long paragraph down about 6 lines, what need is there to categorically state the measurements found in the Kalachakra? It was necessary to state the measurements of this world realm together with its planets, its calculations, and its zodiac, because the movements of the 5 planets, their calculations, and the way the circle of houses revolves, and the way the sun and the moon move within it, are taught in the Kalachakra and are ascertained by the earth-drawn chart. When this happens, a conviction is born that these teachings can be held as being literally true. So what it's talking about here is that by using these measurements as they get applied then to the movement of the various bodies in the sky, and those actually tend to work out in terms of what you would anticipate would happen, that then you can therefore take those measurements to be true. Of course, in terms of a literal point of view based on science, we would say, well, there's a little breakdown somewhere in the middle there. The distances all of a sudden are way off from that. But I don't think that's exactly what he's trying to refer to here, although given the time frame it might be. So we don't really know. I just reiterate again that I don't think that that is all that critical. And so moving on to page 156, the second paragraph there at the top. But surely it is wrong to teach something that does not validly exist instead of teaching the validly established truth. That is not necessarily so. And then he goes through an example of a butcher who's looking for some animals and goes to somebody to try and find out whether that person has seen the animals so that the butcher can go get them and butcher them. And the person doesn't want to lie, but on the other hand, he also doesn't want the butcher to kill these animals because of their philosophical point of view, ethical point of view. And so looking at, okay, what is the best thing to do with this ethical dilemma that is being presented here. And then on page 157, there is, in the last paragraph there, a summary. To summarize, it is not right to use one set of measurements of the world found in the Abhidharma or in the Kalachakra to refute the other. The Abhidharma explanation is used by Acharya Nagarjuna and others when explaining the outside world as a purification base for the generation and completion stages of Guhya Samaja. If there were no outside world with no such measurements, the path of purification would also be invalid. Similarly, if there were no outside world with measurements as explained in the Kalachakra, it would not be valid as the purification base for the path. As expressed in the quote, as without, so within the body. So here he's trying to make a case that they're basically both valid in terms of their intention and why those are there and how they are being applied within those contexts. Just to review the 4 reliances that I've referred to here. The first one is to rely on the teaching, not the teacher. The meaning, not the words. The definitive meaning, not the provisional meaning. And then finally the transcendent wisdom, not the knowledge, ordinary knowledge. So that's the key point. The fourth one of those, the transcendent wisdom aspect, is, I think, the most important one for us to pay close attention to.